On January 3rd, 2026, the world woke up to a total political earthquake. The United States had just launched a military strike in Venezuela and captured its president, Nicolás Maduro. So, how on earth did this happen? Why did it happen? And what was the global fallout? Well, we're going to unpack it all right now. It all kicked off in the dead of night. For people living in Caracas, these were the first clues that something huge was unfolding. The series of massive explosions, the roar of jets overhead, it was the start of a military operation that would literally change the course of a nation. You can bet the news sent shock waves through capitals all over the world. Everyone was asking the exact same question: how? How does the United States military just go into a sovereign country and arrest its sitting head of state? That's the big question we're here to investigate. Okay, so let's start with the first phase of the assault. It was codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve, and it was a swift, overwhelming show of air power. It was really designed to create chaos and just clear a path for the forces on the ground. The first 30 minutes were just a stunning display of shock and awe. Right around 2 a.m. local time, a force of over 150 U.S. aircraft began these surgical strikes on military bases, communication towers, you name it. The goal? Crystal clear. Instantly paralyze Venezuela's command and control, sowing as much chaos and confusion in the capital as possible. But here's the thing, an operation of this magnitude, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. To really get the why, we need to rewind and look at the long, slow burn of tensions that led to this firestorm. Yeah, this was definitely a slow burn that just suddenly ignited. Tensions had been simmering for years, starting publicly back in 2020 when the U.S. actually indicted Maduro on narco-terrorism charges. Then you have the 2024 election, which was widely called a fraud. By August 2025, the U.S. was moving warships into the region, and by December, a full-on maritime blockade was in place, seizing Venezuelan oil tankers. Now, to justify all this, the Trump administration offered two very different stories. Officially, this was all about the war on drugs. Maduro was accused of running a narco-state, and his top officials were supposedly part of the cartel of the Suns. But then there was a much more blunt motivation: oil. President Trump was on the record saying the U.S. should have kept all that oil. So here's the central conflict. Was this a legitimate law enforcement action, or was it, as critics were saying, just a resource grab? So with that political context set, let's drill down into the mechanics of the military mission itself, who was involved, and the meticulous planning that went into Operation Absolute Resolve. This mission was for the absolute best of the best. The ground assault was led by the Army's Delta Force, flown in by the legendary 160th, the Night Stalkers. A CIA team was already on the ground providing intel. And here's a key detail. The FBI's hostage rescue team was there to perform the formal arrest. That's a move clearly designed to frame this as a law enforcement action. The planning was so intense, they even built a full-scale mock-up of Maduro's safe house to rehearse. The raid was a success, and within hours, the world learned that a sitting president was now in U.S. custody, which, as you can imagine, sparked an absolute diplomatic firestorm. And the visual confirmation? It came from President Trump himself. He posted this photo. It shows Maduro on a U.S. vessel, blindfolded, wearing noise-canceling headphones, and just dressed in a simple gray sweatsuit. It was a powerful, and for many, a pretty shocking image that proved the operation had worked. But as you'd expect, the view from Caracas was completely different. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez immediately went on state TV to condemn the act, not as an arrest, but as the illegal and illegitimate kidnapping of the president. This really set the stage for a major clash over who was actually in charge. So what happens when you capture a head of state? This is totally unprecedented. This breaks down the legal journey. First, he's apprehended by Delta Force. Second, he's flown directly to a military base in New York. Third, he's formally charged with narco-terrorism and other crimes. And finally, he's arraigned in a Manhattan federal court where he pleads not guilty. Just like that, a sovereign leader was now a defendant in the U.S. justice system. This created an immediate, massive power vacuum. The U.S. position, stated pretty bluntly by President Trump, was, "We are going to run the country until a transition." Meanwhile, back in Caracas, the Supreme Tribunal swore in Delcy Rodriguez as acting president, and she declared Venezuela would never again be a colony of any empire. You had two competing governments, both claiming they were legit. The fallout from this was immediate and it was global. The operation drew some really sharp lines in the sand, creating these deep divisions both at home and abroad. And look, this operation came with a very real human cost. While the U.S. reported only 2 of its soldiers were injured, Venezuelan and Cuban officials reported over 80 people killed. That figure included civilians and, importantly, 32 Cuban military and security personnel who were also in the country. That's a detail that really highlights the international angle of the conflict on the ground. The global reaction was just as starkly divided as this chart shows. You had major powers like Russia and China, plus France and most of Latin America, who quickly condemned the strike. At the same time, key U.S. allies like Germany and Israel praised it. Others, like the UK, urged caution, and the United Nations itself even weighed in, calling the whole thing a dangerous precedent for international relations. And that division was just as sharp right here inside the United States. Republicans were largely supportive, framing Maduro as a narco-terrorist. Democrats, on the other hand, condemned it, with Senator Ruben Gallego calling it an illegal war. Major newspapers like the New York Times were highly critical, and the public was totally split. You had no blood for oil protests in Times Square at the same time you had celebrations in the Venezuelan community down in Florida. Critics of the operation very quickly started using this specific term to explain the U.S. motive: resource imperialism. It's basically a policy where a powerful country seeks to control another's natural resources, often through military force. And, given the constant talk around Venezuela's massive oil reserves, this term became central to the whole debate. And all of this brings us to a fundamental and, frankly, a pretty unsettling question that hangs over this entire event. When one nation captures the leader of another, where exactly is the line between law enforcement and an act of war? It's a question that challenges the very nature of sovereignty and international law. And honestly, it's one the world is still grappling with today.